What's up, guys? Welcome to an all-new episode of Convos on the Pedicab. I'm here outside of Sagebrush, a live music venue in Austin, Texas, with Morgan Witt, a city council candidate for District 7. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and Morgan is adamant upon wearing a mask because she has to canvass, go door to door. She talks to a lot of vulnerable people. I don't know if she has any family members that have like pre-existing conditions or are vulnerable and whatnot. And so, you know, I too am wearing a mask because I want Morgan to feel safe and comfortable. So anyway, Morgan, thank you so much for coming here. I really appreciate it. I know you have a very active campaign schedule. So the fact that you even came out to want to talk to me on a pedicab really says a lot about you, and I cannot put into words how much I appreciate this. So that being said, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what made you decide to run.
So I'm a born and raised Austinite. Grew up in Northwest Austin. And I've always cared a lot about people. I'm a bleeding heart. And so, you know, I eventually went into education and decided that that was how I wanted to serve my community. And I've done that for quite a while, both in teaching and then in the tech industry. But 2020 has just like exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in our community that some I didn't know about, some I knew about but didn't realize the severity of. But what I really realized was how long-standing these problems are. Affordability, transportation, equity and social reform, investing in our communities. These are things that have been plaguing Austin for decades, and we haven't done anything about it.
Yeah, 2020 is kind of a shit show, I would say.
So I decided that I didn't want to keep waiting around for other people to make change. I wanted to be part of the change that I wanted to see and be a better advocate for my community. So here I am.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we disagree in, and we're going to go into that. But before we go into what we disagree on, I want to talk about what I like about you.
Okay.
And one of the things that I really like about you that might even override a lot of what I disagree with you on is the fact that you are the only city council candidate, aside from myself and Casey, who I dropped out to endorse, but you're the only candidate in North Austin, really. Maybe Mackenzie Kelly too, who's, you know, wants to keep things open and whatnot, but you're the only, you're one of the only candidates that's really going out of her way to advocate and speak out for the bar industry and the music industry and our actual service industry. And both of us may have different ideas as to how to help, because my honest opinion is I don't really think we should have shut down, and we probably could have stayed open as a local economy and been okay. But one of the things I like about you is that you're very adamant about making sure that these industries receive just compensation and stay open and maintain the fabric of our culture. So what made you so passionate about that, and what's your plan for all that?
Yeah, so I guess I've always been really involved in the live music community. It was a big part of my life until the pandemic. There were a number of shows that I had to pull off my calendar after everything went into shutdown. And so I know the community, I know the people involved in it, and I know that it's such an iconic piece of Austin and our identity as a city. And as an iconic and like integral part of our economy.
It is.
And so I kind of see the music industry here as a microcosm of what we're seeing at the national level, which is we're in a disaster, we're in crisis mode, and there are no supports for anybody. And so we should be able to shut down so that people can stay safe and healthy, and the people and the businesses involved in our economy need to be supported so that we can do that.
The businesses have to be supportive, and I think that if you're going to shut down anything, there needs to be a pre-existing plan in place to give individuals and the businesses just compensation. Exactly. And in order for the businesses to qualify for just compensation, I know they do this in Germany, where they have to actually continue to pay their workers what they were paying them while things were shut down. So if you can do it in that type of manner, while also not restricting people's, freedoms and liberties of mobility and of movement, then you're good.
And that's where we disagree.
No, well, hold on a second. Okay. But, and I understand, like, you got to be smart and you got to be careful about stuff. But, I've seen, like, videos and I've seen stuff, like, in other countries where you have drones flying over and giving people, like, $1,000+ fines if they're, like, out walking their dog, or they're, like, going to the park by themselves, or they're going to the beach, or, like, with their kids with no one in sight. But then they're, like, crowded, in massive lines at Walmart. So I think that, like, there's got to be things have to still be done within reason, where people should still have freedom of mobility, but there should also be safety involved too.
Well, you're going down kind of a rabbit hole there.
A little bit.
And we could talk all day about the approach to the health and safety part of the pandemic. But at the end of the day, if we don't allow people to maintain livelihood while they're trying to stay safe and healthy, then people are going to have to choose one or the other. And that's the situation we're in right now. And I think where you and I agree, we shouldn't have to tell people you either get to make a living or you get to be safe and healthy. You should have the ability to do both at the same time. And this is a problem that was a long time coming. Pandemics are not new. They've been happening forever. And so we've had plenty of opportunity to prepare ourselves for this. And I think it speaks to a broader conversation of how we just don't take care of our community.
We also don't take care of ourselves.
Or ourselves.
We have a really bad problem taking care of
yes.
ourselves.
Yep.
I looked at this whole CDC thing, and 94% of people who died of this virus or who were, like, seriously affected had, like, very severe pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
And we have, like, the highest obesity rate in the world, where we've been living on a diet of GMOs and processed foods and things that are horrible for you and whatnot. And, like, that's catching up when you're in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that when you have look, in the beginning, nobody knew about this virus. It was a novel thing. And so shutting things down for, like, a couple of weeks to see what was going on, I don't like it, but I get it. I understand. But now that, you have better therapeutics, we're understanding how to, like, keep our hospital capacities somewhat reasonable, and people understand, like, who's more susceptible to getting severe complications, there needs to also be a focus on improving people's lifestyles so that, in the event of a pandemic or something like that, you're less likely to have a severe reaction to something like this.
Again, that is a rabbit hole conversation that we could talk all day about. I agree with you. I think that another thing that makes us susceptible to this is the elevated stress level that Americans have because we work too hard. We don't have boundaries around our lives, and we commit ourselves to making a living because we don't get paid enough. We don't get the benefits that we deserve. And so, again, people are having to make a choice.
It's true. And then we also get overly stressed out because we spend too much time on social media.
Yeah. Lack of access to affordable health care, people have to make a decision. Do I go to the doctor and spend $500, or do I just wait it out and see what happens?
Yeah, that is a problem. And I think when you talk about affordable health care, our Democratic Party has to actually, select and promote Democrats who will fix those issues, because that is a serious thing. And so I think that when it comes to the Democratic Party, they need to do a much better job of having candidates that are genuinely going to fix these issues instead of talking about them during election cycles and weaponizing them. So that's another problem in and of itself, and that also goes towards holding your Democratic candidates accountable.
Well, and I think you're raising another really good point, which is a common theme across all issues, which is that, we need, like, these problems are complex and multifaceted. There are so many things that are contributing to these problems, and we need, like, real comprehensive solutions to them. We can't just have these, like, Band-Aid fixes and just kind of, like, throw something at it and see if it sticks. Like, we need people to be thinking more broadly about how do we get into a pandemic situation where people are having to choose between health and making rent, basically.
Well, there's also the fact that, our government and our media has had a history of blatantly lying to us for close to 100 years. So governments
have been lying to their people since governments existed.
Yeah, and naturally speaking, you're probably not considering that track record. It's like the boy who cried wolf. Like, you're not going to believe someone that's habitually lying to you. Have you ever been in, like, a toxic relationship?
Yes.
Okay. So, have you ever, like, not to ask any personal questions, you ever had anybody, like, you ever had a boyfriend who cheated on you?
That's
personal.
Well, it's getting off topic too.
But we're trying to go into something, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, all right, let's say you have somebody who's cheated on you, like, consistently, or cheats on you once, right? Are you gonna, like, trust that person again afterwards?
I understand your point. Like, we already have low voter trust or, like, citizen trust in government, and now we have this situation where it's like they're trying to communicate things that are pretty important, and people don't believe it anyway because we've been lied to so many times.
Yeah, and then people are taking advice from, technocrats and tech moguls who have no medical degrees, I'm not going to name names.
Subject matter experts in the least.
Yeah. Or you're putting people like Greta Thunberg, an amazing, super courageous person who's bringing up a lot of important issues on a coronavirus panel as an expert. It's like, things don't add up. So when people aren't trusting the authority figures, what do you expect? What do you expect to happen, Morgan? There has to be trust, there has to be transparency, and people have to tell you, like, what's actually going on and level with you. And nobody's doing that.
One of the things, like, on the local level, Austin's leadership and our local government have a history of not being transparent, not being accessible to most people in Austin, and decisions are being made by a very loud vocal minority of people. And so I think that there are ways that we can change that narrative so that more people do have input, more people are well informed about the issues, and people feel like they actually do have a say in their local government, because it's sort of like this learned helplessness, right?
I agree.
It's like, what is the point of me participating if I'm going to get left behind and unheard?
Yeah, and then we're perpetuating, like, a culture of poverty where there's, like, almost like this cool nobility thing in being, like, poor and whatnot. I remember one time when I spoke this is when I was running for mayor a couple years ago. And this was in District 1, and this was when Natasha was running, and she told, like, this was at Houston Tillotson, and she told and Natasha, remember, she told a bunch of black kids at Houston Tillotson that you're probably never going to, like, you're probably not going to own a single family home like your parents did, or what the original American dream was. And, like, you told a bunch of kids that. And,
well, so
like,
I actually,
you know what I mean?
Before this interview, I was in like an annual town hall meeting with the Friends of Austin Neighborhoods, and she was a guest speaker. And we were talking specifically about land use and equity within home ownership. And she's right. With the way that houses are continuing to increase in value and the way that inequity continues to be a systemic problem, they won't. And none of us will be able to buy a single family home.
I disagree with you. I completely disagree with you. I think that there's so many opportunities to do well and be successful if you're a creative thinker, if you think outside the box, if you are financially educated, if you understand like how basic investing principles work.
What about the fact that people don't have equitable access to that education?
Maybe, but you can go on YouTube and you can go on Investopedia, and a lot of basic investing and a lot of basic financial literacy and education.
How did you learn about Investopedia?
I Googled it. Like investing,
How did you learn about investing?
How did I learn about investing?
Yeah.
How did I learn about investing? My dad had an account through, like, a stock account through work.
Oh, okay.
And, like,
so what if you grew up in a family where nobody had ever heard of it?
That changes the ballgame, and that's why when I was running, I talked about the importance of teaching financial education in those communities so people can hear that.
I 100% agree with that.
So I understand it, and that's why I was very big on subsidizing financial education programs in AISD and in the Boys and Girls Clubs, and utilizing town halls to conduct financial education programs so that people can actually benefit and take advantage of our economic system, because there are a ton of opportunities here. So that's how you got to bridge the gap, Morgan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think one area where you and I I think we agree on more things than perhaps it seems like we do.
No, I agree. I wouldn't have wanted you on the show if
we differ on the way we would approach the solution.
Yeah,
but one thing that we fundamentally disagree on, and I would say this is the case for a lot of the other candidates and other races that I disagree with, is our belief about how much outside factors affect what people can do in their lives.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
So, it's a very American value that, like, you work hard and you put in the elbow grease and you get what you want and you're successful.
I want to believe that shit.
But the reality is, like, there are a lot of external factors that give some people undue advantage over other people, and that's perpetuated over generations.
Right.
And so when we talk about access to a house, like, I actually wrote a blog post about this. My parents are very middle-class people. They bought a middle-class house in the 80s, and I grew up learning that if you work hard, you go to college, blah, 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 you get a house. You will earn a house. And I now have 3 degrees.
What do you have your degree? Hold on, wait. What are your degrees in? Let's.
Education, psychology, and Spanish linguistics.
I actually got a psych degree too. So
okay.
There you go. We have
All
more.
right.
We have more in common.
See,
Yeah.
well,
I got a BA in psych. Yeah.
Contentious debate is how you find common ground.
Yeah. I wouldn't call this contentious. I feel like this is a pretty friendly
but my point
discussion.
is, like, I did all the things I was supposed to do, and I can't afford to buy a house in Austin.
Yeah, but
and I had the privilege of going to college, of having a family that taught me financial literacy, of having, like, good business connections.
Do you have any investments right now?
No.
All right, so.
My point is that there's a lot about life circumstance that we can improve for people so that they do have the opportunity to buy a home.
I understand, but I mean, I'm also saying,
But also,
like,
it's about updating the land use code.
Yeah, we will talk about that in a minute though. But I still want to go on this a little bit. But so when I was getting my, I was lucky. I got CARES Act money, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm okay, and me being okay is great. But now you got to look out for, like, are you going to still have bars and music venues to take people to when this is over with? And that's a concern. Am I going to have a shop to go back to if you're not getting ad money from South by Southwest, and if the city's going to still make people pay permitting fees? So maybe if you get elected, we could address that with the permitting fees and whatnot. But that's for another time.
I've heard some permitting fees nightmare stories.
I can imagine. But what I'm getting with this is that, I was lucky enough to be able to, when I was getting my stimulus money, I was buying Bitcoin with my stimulus money. Like, I had money, like, I never took out a student loan, and I substitute teach in, like, Hayes County, where I did last year. I'm not doing any of that shit now, right? Like, especially if I have to wear a mask all day, like, I'm not, if I don't have to do it, I'm not going to do it.
You don't want to do substitute teaching in a Spider-Man mask all day?
No.
I don't think that would actually
be pretty awesome to do. I'm not going to lie. Maybe
one chance.
We'll see, but anyway, well, I just got it today. I had a different kind of mask that I'll show you.
Okay.
Afterwards, but what I was saying with this is that, I was just, like, I opened up a TD Ameritrade and I was buying stocks and buying like Bitcoin and like investing this entire time, and I've done okay from it. And, like, there was a golden opportunity in, like, March and April to actually build real meaningful equity and bridge that wealth gap, but nobody talked about it at all. Everyone was just fear-mongering over COVID.
So are you saying that people who are just, like, trying to scrape by should be using that money instead to invest in Bitcoin?
No, but I'm saying there's more opportunity than people like to make out to be. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying there's more opportunity to do things than people make out. And I also wait, hold on, Morgan.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Right,
I hate interrupting people. I hate it. But what I'm also saying is that when you're shutting things down, when there's no plan in place, you're and our city council knew there was no plan in place. And our city council also knew that our governor is sitting on $6 billion with no real plan as to how to help these industries, but they're still perpetuating these shutdowns. And when you do that, you actually increase income inequality, and then you make it so that the gap between these mega billionaires and everyday people widens, and then the Walmarts, the Amazons, the Targets, the Ubers, all these big technocrats. And if you looked at the markets, like all the tech companies, like the Microsofts, the Facebooks, the Apples, like Tesla, all these companies were crushing it in the pandemic, and everybody else was like kind of getting left behind, minus people who are smart enough to buy options and shares and stocks in those things. You know what I mean? So, like, there's the way in which they're doing these shutdowns and perpetuating it, it's adding to income inequality, and I'm worried about creating a culture of corporatism, and I think you're worried about it too. And as long as we don't have corporatism on a mass scale,
we're already there.
No, it's still not too late to turn back. we're not at the point of no return yet. We're getting very close.
We're getting there.
We're getting very close. And as long as we don't pass the point of no return, I don't care what solution we get to, as long as we get to a solution. Anyway.
Hold on, I gotta remember where I was. Oh, yeah, so, I don't know. I don't know that I have much more to say about it other than, there's huge opportunity here to kind of reevaluate what we value as a country and as a city. And where are we going to put our investments? Are we going to invest in our people and our industries to make sure that they can thrive and withstand, economic disaster? Or are we just going to keep sitting on our hands and say, well, it's likely that this won't happen again. We'll just kind of kick the can down the road. And that's what we have seen over and over and over again, is just kicking the can down the road and, kind of talking about intentions but not really delivering on them.
Sure. Respect. Have you looked at our public health budget for this for next year?
I have, but it's been a little while. What specifically was?
Well, we haven't. Our goals in terms of how much we're projecting to spend on public health is literally the same as it was last year when we went $9 million over budget because of this. And if you're in a pandemic, and look, the fact of the matter is we give a lot of money to the Wuhan lab. Viruses and plagues come out of China on a pretty consistent basis. Not to go into China or anything, but pandemics could very well be a thing of the future within the next decade. And we're doing nothing to plan for future pandemics to help increase hospital capacity.
Pandemics are kind of, like I said, they've been over the course of history. They're not new. They are going to your point, they will become more frequent the more that humans have contact with animals, because that's where they come from.
Yeah, or they get made in laboratories, but that's another. That's
another point of disagreement.
That's another topic of. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are like doctors and have like medical degrees and whatnot, and they've. I'm not the only one who's been saying this.
Okay. I mean, we disagree on it.
Yeah,
fine.
and there was like a bunch of like emergency travel nurses that were like that I was like giving rides to for a little bit and trying to like see what things were like in like August. And half these nurses that I was giving rides to, they were more worried about Bill Gates than they were about the virus. And these were nurses, like these were FEMA nurses that I was talking to that were like telling me straight up that they're more worried about Bill Gates than they were about the virus. So I think that there's a lot of conflicting opinions about this, and it's not just from like a bunch of conspiracy theorists and scientists. You know what I mean? It's like people in the health community are conflicted about this also, and it's not being talked about.
Agreed. It's a hotly debated topic.
But you said something earlier that we went off topic on. There's a vocal minority. Who's the vocal minority in Austin? Like, because you're pretty in on this. You're a part of the Young Democrats. You've gotten endorsed by some pretty big groups like the Sunrise Movement. You've gotten endorsed by.
I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that our city talks so much about climate change. They didn't do shit about the Permian pipeline.
So
minus your opponent, who actually did the lawsuit, but that's.
Yeah. Well, there are different ways to think about a vocal minority, but I think about it a lot in the ways that we talk about land use and housing. If you look at a lot of the neighborhood plans that are developed in Austin, 95+% of those plans are passed with 1% or less of the vote in the neighborhood, and those votes affect thousands of people. And when we talk about, like the project recently off of Montopolis, where they were talking about adding affordable housing units, again, it was a vocal minority who said they didn't want it there. And because we didn't have equitable community input, their voice had undue influence.
So I haven't looked into that as much as I would like to, but I do know Fred McGee, who's like a very big, who helped write the People's Plan for land and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I've talked to that guy numerous times, and I feel I trust his opinion. Like, that guy's been active and involved in this community for decades. And if that guy doesn't think that plan is really affecting his community, there might be some rhyme or reason to it, and it should be something like that should be revisited so that people like Fred will feel comfortable with that.
Well, and
That's
think,
what
like,
I think, you know?
I don't look at that one project as the be-all, end-all example. What I look at are patterns and recurring themes of rejecting projects for affordable housing because a few concerned property owners in the area don't want affordable housing in their neighborhood. And, we see the same on city council. There are people who want to maintain the status quo. They don't want to see change, and they don't want to see affordable housing. But what I think people don't realize is that in Austin, because it's getting so expensive, 60 to 80% MFI affordable housing is middle class income.
Well, that's upper middle class. That's upper middle class.
As a teacher, I qualified for 60% MFI. My first job in tech, 75% MFI. And so when these people say, I don't want affordable housing in my neighborhood because it's going to bring undesirables, it's like, well, you're basically saying that public servants don't deserve to live in your neighborhood.
I think a lot of people don't understand that.
It's like, okay, if agreed. And, if we take the example of the Montopolis project, it's like, okay, you don't like the project, fine. What solution are you offering? Because the problem isn't going away.
Well, that's the same
and
with
that's what we don't see. We don't see solutions.
That's also the same with homelessness and the defunding stuff. Yep. Because, to be honest with you, when you said a vocal minority, I was thinking about all the people that got us to reverse that camping ban with no plan as to what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
Like the Chris Harris
and
those.
That is just one other example of how city council makes decisions without thinking about thoughtful implementation or considering the consequences. It was not a proactive move. We've bought up housing assets that are not being used to house the homeless right now. We are not effectively coordinating services to the homeless right now because we don't have any centralized leadership around it.
But you're also this whole enabling urban camping with no real plan as to how to help people get off the streets. It's just going to add to the homeless population, and it's just going to help these developers who give large sums of money to our city council to profit off of this, because the more homeless people that come into Austin, what do you need? Housing. Who's building the housing? Developers. It's the same developers that are giving large sums of money to the Jimmy Flanagans, the POs, the Mayor Adlers, the David Canchin.
Well, I think that's a very complicated and nuanced issue, because even anti-development leaders like my opponent are taking developer money. And so
I saw that. I did see that. And I actually reached out to her, and she's going to hopefully come on before, but she definitely wants to come and talk to me after the election. And I did see that. But we're not. I don't want. We don't need to trash any.
I'm not trashing. I'm just stating a fact. I'm saying it's complicated.
I saw the Bulldog
because
article
there
too.
are multiple sides of it.
Yes.
And the other thing that I think we need to recognize is that you're right. People are still homeless. So the camping ban decriminalizes and repealing it.
Yeah.
Decriminalize, and that's a very important thing, because criminalizing homelessness only exacerbates the issue. It makes it harder for people to reintegrate back into society. It's more expensive for taxpayers to pay for mental health care and other healthcare services through the criminal justice system. But
sort of.
If we don't offer the support and the housing and the services that they need in tandem, then what impact is there?
Sort of. I would have agreed with you in 2018, but when you look at our new budget, and we're spending $60 million on homeless services, and one of my criticisms, and two, we're going to go to defunding, how we defunded APD, and when they looked at how they defunded APD, $60 million out of the $170 million that they cut out of APD is going to homelessness. And it's just dude, we have a whole music industry, we have a service industry, we have a cult, we have a piece of Austin that that our culture is ingrained in, that our city's doing nothing to help when they made these budget cuts to APD. Yeah. And then it's we're gonna just enable vagrancy. It's gonna rub people the wrong way.
Well, I have two.
Does that mean, you know what I mean?
I have two answers to that. One is, to your point, spending money isn't enough. Are we spending the money effectively? We have to ask ourselves that question. But the other thing we have to be thinking about is, how are we preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place? If we don't address systemic issues like affordability, making sure people have access to resources and access to jobs that, in industries that still exist, then people will continue to become homeless.
Sure.
And we will continue to
Sure,
have to
sure.
like address that issue.
Sure, I agree. We got to do a better job with our education system.
Yes.
We got to do a better job of teaching like proper financial literacy so people understand like how the system works. I get all that stuff, right? And we also need to do a better job of getting more people involved locally. And I think that when more people own single-family homes, you create more local involvement because generally speaking, when you own something and you have skin in the game, you are going to be more involved than if you don't have skin in the game. That's just the thing. I grew up in New York City. Nobody gives a shit about what's going on locally. You know why? Because nobody owns anything. So you have to do stuff to increase ownership as much as possible. And if that means developers build things where it's all rent to own, people need to have ownership in where they live. You need that. In order to actually create real, genuine, local civic involvement, there needs ownership. That being said, there's a lot of mental health stuff too. There's a shit ton of mental health stuff. Our teachers and our educators in our education system, they overly prescribe like Adderall and like antidepressants and prescription drugs to kids when we should be emphasizing proper nutrition and exercise and breathing fresh air and open communication. We need to do a better job of doing that. And there's also a lot of drug addiction too. Like I'm downtown, like I pedicab and I see a lot of this shit. Like there are a lot of just straight up drug addicts that are out there too. And we need to like improve our mental health and improve the way we communicate with each other so that you see less of that.
Yeah, well, mental health can be both a result of circumstances and also a cause of other circumstances. And so again, this goes back to systemic issues. Are we making sure that we're preventing these things from becoming problems in the first place? And then on top of that, once people do get into these situations, what are we doing to help them?
Okay. I think we got to do a better job of that. How do you feel about like mobile lobes and whatnot, like mobile lobes and fishes and some of those types of communities? And I have a buddy who I don't know if you saw one of my like last episodes. I had this guy. I had a friend from jiu-jitsu named Blake Carter who started this organization called Serve Inspire, where they provide like toiletries to the homeless, and they try to provide like job training and rehabilitation services and all that. And I think that we got to do a better job of like helping to subsidize and bring awareness to those types of programs.
Well, I've actually worked in workforce training and development for people who, were very low income and didn't have access to traditional types of education and training. And it was a life changer for people. Just being able to receive not just basic education, but also the training and then to get a certificate or a license or something, and then be able to go have a career that's well-paying. It didn't just change their lives, it changed their families' lives.
Yeah,
I'm 100%.
Yeah, we need more of that. We need more of that. Like, I think that's a big...
Well, and so if you think about, to your point about education, like, we prize education as a qualifier for whether you deserve a job or not, but we don't prioritize it when it comes to investment or the way that we structure our community. So we really do need to be investing in it because we're requiring that people have it to have a job. And so it's like a self-limiting system. So I totally agree with you. We need to expand that and kind of rethink, like, how does one become qualified for a job?
I agree. So I there's a lot of stuff that because I like to, one of the things about doing a job like this and like doing like jiu-jitsu and whatnot, right, and just being out in downtown, and I talk to a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people who have a very wide range of political opinions, and some of the like extremely conservative people that I talk to are saying stuff about like, hey, there's going to be a crime wave from all this stuff, and like they're hyping like safety concerns and all that, right? Mm-hmm. And while I think that overall we are still a very safe city, I think that some of the conditions that were put in place by our council can pave the way for that to start changing in a very negative manner.
Okay.
And I'm going to explain why I feel that way, okay?
Okay.
So, when you enable urban camping, you're going to have a lot of homeless people that are out and about with tents in tent cities and seeing all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who are living in those tents along the highway it sucks having to say this, but a lot of them have drug problems, right? And so you see a whole community of people who are like severely addicted to drugs. Who do you think is like licking their chops, like rubbing their fingers like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons right now? Drug dealers.
Yeah.
All right? Drug dealers and gangbangers, right? So you could very easily see, we don't see this now, but we should be like thinking about this, okay? You could very easily see like an influx of like drug dealers like competing for like prime real estate, so to speak. And then you'll have like rival gangs fighting each other. And then like I have friends who are bouncers downtown, and they're like these homeless people. Some of them have like turf wars for like which spot is theirs and whatnot. And then when you have like a limitedly staffed police department while this is happening and while we're growing at this rate, this could be it's not now, Morgan, but it could be a recipe for disaster. And it's something that we, and you specifically, because you might actually be on the city council, need to think about and figure out how to avoid that while not punishing people for being poor.
This is another one of those very complex issues.
It's loaded,
you know, where it's like, oh my God, there are a million factors that contribute to this. I will say that when it comes to crime, people react from a place of fear and concern about the future.
Yeah.
Which I understand. But we need to do what's been proven effective. And we need to be thinking about, well, what are like the root causes here and what really is going to happen? And so if you look from a broad perspective, Austin, for a city its size, its police department is over budgeted and overstaffed. That's number one. Number two, we are one of the safest cities in the U.S. We have one of the lowest crime rates for a city our size. Number three, not only was police staffing not cut, but police officers received a raise. Like, they got a raise October 1st. So, like, I hear a lot of people saying, oh my God, the world is going to collapse, and yet I haven't seen any evidence that we are stripping the police department of its staff or its ability to fight crime.
Have you ever like looked on the Citizen app?
I have not.
So the Citizen app is a tool that you can use on your phone to see like what types of violent like crimes and violent crimes are taking place. And I have a buddy on Twitter who posts things on the Citizen app constantly. Like there's a string of people at UT that are getting mugged on left and right. And there's like a string of burglaries right now at UT. And I'm also hearing stories about how like, you know, response time is increasing and like our police are not really able to like handle these calls very well. And I even personally,
talk about that?
Yeah, even personally, I had a friend who got robbed at gunpoint, pedicabbing. He got pistol whipped while he was giving a ride, and then you're cutting forensics, and it's going to make it that much harder I feel like it might make it that much harder for APD to even find the guy who did it, and it could get an open invitation for people like myself, or like anybody who's like a bartender, or like a door guy, or anybody to be like targeted, especially if it's like a female who can't like protect herself as well. So it opens a door to a lot of shit that can happen that we shouldn't see happening.
Right. So again, in part speculation, but you're right, these things can happen. But we need to be looking at what causes crime rates to go up. Is it less police, or is it that we're in an economic recession almost, basically? Well, we know that economic factors and lack of access to resources and income, lack of access to essential services like mental health care, those are things that directly lead to an increase in crime. The other thing is that if you look at the breakdown of call responses that the police respond to, less than 25% of what they respond to is crime related. So I agree with you. They are slower to respond right now. They are overburdened. And it's not because there aren't enough police. It's because they're doing a lot of work that police officers shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that another reason why the camping ban got overturned is because you saw like 10 cops next to one homeless guy, and somebody could have been getting robbed, and now you're not able to help that person because you're overly concerned with somebody who's not hard. Like, so there's a lot of other problems that led to that, and people need to be aware, because I think that one extreme should not beget another extreme, and I think that there is a there's a very reasonable middle ground that I think that most people want with policing.
Yeah, well, and so when I look at sort of the budget restructuring, what I see is a lot of them taking civilian functions and reallocating that funding to civilian agencies who will take over that role. It's not that they took that money away from the cops and they're still expected to do that job. It's now that, okay, well, the cops aren't the only people we need to respond to 911 calls. It really depends on what the call is for. So why should the police have to be responsible for every single response type?
Could you give a specific example?
Yeah, like mental health response.
Right, but like, what do you mean a mental health response? Like, what if somebody's having a mental breakdown and they could be like physically a threat to somebody?
So there was an article posted recently about a program in Denver called the STAR program. And what they did was, whenever a mental health response call would come into the 911 call center, they would divert it to this mental health response group. There were no armed officers involved. There were no officers at all. And every single time for this pilot program, of all 350 calls they answered, not one time did they need an officer involved. And it was things like someone was naked in the alley because they didn't have anywhere to change their clothes, or somebody was having a mental breakdown and it was because they couldn't find something that they needed. And so I think that like we really need to be like, let's look at the data. How often do we really need someone with a, who's armed showing up to a mental health call? Just because it's a high intensity situation doesn't mean that we need a weapon involved. So
Okay.
I'd be interested and they're expanding the program. So I'd be really interested to see if we did a pilot like that in Austin, what would that look like? And I know EMS is kind of like working on something like that where they're doing ride-alongs with cops, but
Our cops should be EMT certified, I think.
well, and so, that's another question is like, if we are going to make them do that work, we need to make sure they're trained properly.
Yeah, I think we
Because I wouldn't want to show up to a call like that and not be trained for it.
Of course, no. I think that our cops are not well trained at all.
Yeah.
I think that I go to 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, right? And I've done like MMA and martial arts and all that stuff for like a few years and whatnot. And there are cops that will roll through the gym and stuff, and some of them are really good,
Yeah.
right? And are consistent. And those guys, you want them pulling you over because they're calm, they're rational, they're respectful, they're accountable. They know how to like de-escalate. They're very calm under stressful situations because like combat sports, they teach you by default that you have to be calm under stress,
Yeah.
right? So those guys are great, but the majority of our police are not trained in this. And so they're less
Yeah.
likely to be calm, and they're less likely to, they're a lot more likely to use like excessive and deadly force when dealing with a combative suspect, or they see somebody that's like bigger and stronger than them and they pull out a gun because they're scared for their life, and they might actually be scared for their life. I've seen videos too where you've had like, there was another video where a cop and some dude in like a North Carolina housing project got into a fight, and that cop just got his fucking ass whooped. And I'm like, dude, like, what are they teaching you? What are they teaching you in the academy? Like, that is literally not how you cop.
Well, and there are so many studies showing that in any kind of officer-involved incident, for every second that goes by where a weapon is not pulled out, the likelihood of anybody being injured or dying drops precipitously. And so it's like,
that's why
why
jiu-jitsu training
is
is
our focus not on de-escalation?
That's why jiu-jitsu training and like making sure that you have at least a blue belt and you're training consistently is so important, because that will lead to the de-escalation by default without you spending a ton of money on it.
Now, I don't know enough about jiu-jitsu to answer that one way or another, but to your point, like, there needs to be appropriate training and preparedness for these high-intensity situations, because a lot of people are getting hurt. Plain and simple.
No, I agree. Fully agree with that. Fully agree.
I mean, every day I scroll through my Facebook feed and I see article after article after article of another person dying because they were shot by a cop.
That's true, but there's also like a thing where like you work in tech too, where these tech companies could also be using, and did you see the Social Dilemma movie?
I did.
How great was that movie?
It was pretty good,
It was an eye-opener.
Eye-opening.
And I also saw the HBO thing, like Agents of Chaos, where they talked about like how they had all these like Russian troll farms that were used to like get Trump elected and destabilize create destabilization to get Trump elected and whatnot. And look, tech companies, foreign countries, can manipulate algorithms on these websites to make people think that things are a lot worse than they are. To create a and they do that too.
Has an affinity for that anyway.
Yes, and I honestly think that we're probably like, and I talked to one of my last guests about it. I had this my friend Blake, who's this gay dude, like super out of the closet, very open, very comfortable, and we were talking about like, you know, how we were probably like the most accepting that we've ever been in our history. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me, and he grew up in conservative Texas, and he came out in conservative Texas. His dad's a football coach. Like, all he's been getting was like love and positivity from it. You know, so I think that if you really like get off the social media and you get off the news and you know, don't listen to what like these corporations tell you, and you just interact with human beings. Like, I deactivated my Facebook for about 2 months after the first BLM stuff. Yeah. And I was like, holy shit, we're like so kind to each other. Like, we are so much less divided, and we are in so much of a better place, and we are so much more evolved and more tolerant than we've ever been. And it's almost like these tech companies, the social media companies, our corporate news outlets have like an agenda to push the opposite message.
Well, I mean, I think it's a known reality that there is police brutality, and then we need change. Yeah. But you're right, the news, they do what gets them responses, and it's clickbait.
Clickbait, yeah.
It's clickbait.
Yeah, and there's also like police brutality for people that weren't wearing masks or weren't social distancing too.
Yeah.
And a lot of people weren't, like a lot of the BLM people and whatnot, nobody was saying shit about that. And that's still a police brutality issue.
Well, having been at a lot of the protests here in Austin, I'll tell you that our BLM protests were treated very differently than the anti-mask protests.
Kind of, yes. I was at both too. Have you been at any of the anti-mask protests?
No, because I wear a mask and I believe
Whatever,
that COVID
fine,
is
okay,
real.
okay. So, I've actually been to both, and I'm going to tell you.
I've seen it from a distance.
Okay, so the anti-mask protests are a lot of fun.
I mean, I think BLM. I'll tell you, a lot of the BLM protests were planned and intended to be celebrations, and we went down with music, with cardboard signs, and we got tear gassed and spit on and kettlebell,
kettlebells?
Kettled.
I thought you said kettlebell.
I was about to say kettlebell, but I meant kettled.
Damn.
I'm so sorry. What time is it?
Hey, we're gonna wrap up soon. Hey.
It's
shit. Okay. I guess we gotta wrap up pretty soon. But what I was gonna say is, the anti-maskers do get treated differently.
Yeah.
But one thing I noticed when I was at those things, right? And let's just say this: both protests are valid. Like, if you're maybe not the anti-mask stuff, but like the anti-stay-at-home stuff is valid. If you're not being given just compensation while you have a small business and you're worried about losing your home and everything you worked for, you have every right to protest that. If you're a bar owner, you have every right to do that. Especially when the governor is telling you to close on a Friday and you bought all your equipment for that weekend with no chance of getting it back while you're struggling in a pandemic. You have every right to protest and go there and do what you're doing. Those are valid. And the BLM protests are valid. And one of the things that got me upset about this was the fact that, like, you didn't see, like, that many, like, BLM protesters, like, coming to the reopen stuff and, showing support when people of color own businesses. People of this also affects people of color. Like, when that lady Shelley Luther, like, opened up her hair salon, there are a lot of, like, Black and Hispanic women that do hair that are probably really glad that she did what she did, because they were able to, like, start making a living a lot sooner because of that. So there's, like, there's a whole multifaceted discussion about this, Morgan. You know,
and
like,
there's certainly overlap between the two communities, but I think there's so much that could be done better right now that people get overwhelmed, and it's like, I have to pick my battles.
For sure, 100%. But one of the things too is that when I was at the anti-stay-at-home stuff, you had, like, the people there were telling the cops, like, hey, thanks for protecting our constitutional liberties and doing all that. Like, they were respectful to the cops while they were protesting. Whereas, like, a lot of the BLM guys actually were respectful, but there was a loud minority of people that were super loud, super aggressive, calling them pigs, spitting on them, throwing projectiles. I saw cars get lit on fire. I saw somebody throw a Molotov cocktail through a bar on 6. All right, I'm sorry. Hey, listen. There's a lot to unwrap, and I'm really sad. Things are getting juicy.
I know.
But you got a lot to do, and you have a meeting, and I'm sorry that I kept you late.
How dare you?
How dare you? You sound like Greta.
Well, no, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. And like I said, this is a very contentious time. There are a lot of things to disagree about, and I appreciate the opportunity to disagree in a productive way and find common ground.
Exactly, and I'm really glad you did this because that's what this thing is for.
Yeah.
And one last thing, I saw videos of things in England and Australia where the cops are brutalizing the anti-maskers and doing shit like that. So it's like we all got to work together on both sides to stop police brutality. That's moral of the story. Everybody, this is for everybody. Everybody has skin in the game with this stuff.
Well, it's a systemic problem. So
Yes.
yeah, we're gonna see
Everybody.
it across the board.
No matter who you are, everyone has skin in the game in this. And it's not about like trivializing what someone else is going through. It's about empathizing what someone else is
Agreed.
going through, so you can be on their side with this.
Agreed.
Morgan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're gonna air 5. We gotta keep you safe. Boom.
Woo!
All right.